I want to get into our Crisis Day 2, talking a little bit about what we know about crises, and how can we be proactive? What are some of the stages of crises? This is a real important facet within this particular area of communication because, again, this shows a different side of PR in terms of how do we respond on things, and how we implement strategies throughout. So, as we've mentioned, crises, I'm going to do a little bit of an overview, are references for an unforeseen event. They require image repair. Um, there's usually some kind of foreseen risk that occurs. I mean, this could be things like negligence, like something has been going on in the company for a while and it hasn't been resolved. Um, or anything that could be identifying, assessing, mitigating that could potentially harm a business. Now, some things we can't control. There are internal and external variables, as we mentioned last week. Um, and a lot of it will be kind of coming into this area of um, a crisis that is external, like a natural disaster, or in this case, a pandemic, that you don't have a lot of control of in terms of what you're doing. However, there is the opposite side of it where you might have something that's very internal, very much within your control, like mistreating employees, for instance, where you would sit there and go, yeah, that is a clear fault, and that is negligence on behalf of the business to make sure that things are done correctly and right. So that is a major consideration when you're getting into crisis plan and risk assessment of how can we mitigate some of these problems before they even occur. So that's where we get into risk. So we do get into those types a little bit. You have crisis that we talk about a lot. We have risk that we talk about a lot, and we have issues that we talk about a lot. So crisis, we know. References unforeseen. We need image repair. We need to act fast. It is something that we need to have a clear response for. It is, by definition, something that could break your company pretty darn easily. Risk assessment is trying to mitigate those things before they even happen. So again, when you get into crisis communication, you might have something to where, again, you have a disgruntled employee, or, God forbid, there's a sexual harassment case that was unresolved. Risk assessment says you need to resolve that in the most ethical way possible. So if that means addressing the situation, firing the person, issuing a statement, and putting that out there immediately, then that's what needs to be done. I mean, the biggest thing with any case within a crisis is don't get caught up in a cover up or a lie. Because when that happens, and we'll talk more about this later on in the semester, when that happens, it's almost like when you get caught in a lie. If you've ever, not that anybody's ever lied to their parents or anything, but if you got caught doing something or you didn't mention something to your parents, the consequences were always infinitely worse when you were caught in a lie or caught not telling something than they were if you would have just straight up told the truth and accepted the consequences therein. Yeah, it wouldn't have been pretty, but it's a lot better than the alternative, which is still have those consequences and then lying about it, which again happens a lot with companies. And so they don't want to ruin their reputation, so they cover it up. And I'm not saying that a lot, or everybody does this. I am saying that there are many instances where this has happened, and that's a major case that needs to be talked about. And I encourage you within your case studies, especially. Um, if you're looking at a crisis situation that was handled poorly, maybe look into something like that. So we talk about crisis, we talk about risk. What about issues? Now, issues are a little bit different. Issues happen daily. You will always have problems within your organization. You will always have stakeholders that are upset about something. You will always have general public tweeting about something, um, that's negative towards your brand. In many ways, issues, you have a choice to respond. You have certainty. Facts are usually more easily obtained. Urgency, sometimes it's not as urgent to respond to unless it accumulates in that case. Cost, how much can I weigh in terms of how much I want to pay? Continuity, excuse me. Issues are addressed during normal time. Time could issues can take significantly longer. Impact may only affect stakeholders, not publics. And we'll talk more about that, but I'll give you an abridged version. Stakeholders always have stake within your business. They are someone that is valuable. They usually have some kind of invested money or identity within your organization. Basically, if your organization gets hurt with a crisis at hand, your stakeholders will as too. That's usually why shareholders and stakeholders usually work well together, although they're not the same thing. Again, you don't have to have money in terms of a brand to be a stakeholder. You just have to be involved in some capacity. So again, I've mentioned before, if App State has a problem, then guess what? I'm affected and you're affected. Because we have some identity stake or as well as some employment in this case. So, that's a major consideration to bring into play is how do I treat my stakeholders versus the public? Public is going to be what it is. You're always going to have people that are upset of something. I usually like to look at airlines because airlines have to deal with crises on a daily basis. Flight gets delayed, flight gets canceled, and in many cases there's not much you can do about it. But when you think about a issue at hand for a person, they may sit there and say, "This is our lives." I was planning this trip. Maybe again, God forbid, my mother is sick and I need to go see her. I need to get on a plane and go see her, that kind of thing. And where airlines, if a flight is canceled, that's a major, major problem for a person that is not a stakeholder, but they are very much a part of the public. And that is for you an issue that you probably should address. So, this is why airlines have such major social media teams to come in and say, I mean, this is back when I think I had like 100 followers. Not that I have that many. I'm trying to talk like I have a huge following on Twitter. But even when I had like 100 followers on Twitter, one of the things that came up was I tweet about something just to see what would happen and say like, okay, I had a flight that was delayed. This is really messed up. United or American or whoever it was, you need to step up, because this was a family vacation we were really looking forward to. Part of it is now ruined because of just some faulty equipment on your end. Like if it was a natural disaster, I didn't put much stock into it because I'm like, what are you supposed to do? But if it, what if it was like interior lights, which I know they have to resolve, but it was something that was really frustrating that I got really mad at. And so I tweeted it, and sure enough, somebody responded to me and pretty quickly and said, "Hey, DM me. Let's get this thing resolved." I think I got like a $300 voucher or something like that. But I mean, that's a response, Whereas, and I'm going to keep with this airplane example. There's a really funny video that was called "United Breaks Guitars." And this was one where a local musician was traveling, and he brought his guitar on board, not on board, on the carrier of the plane, and it ended up breaking. He tried, and this is, it was a really nice guitar. I'll post the link of the song. But basically, what happened was the gentleman with it got really upset, and he said, "Look, he broke my damn guitar. The guitars are expensive." And United did nothing to resolve it. Now, normally this is a case where something like that probably happens more than you'd think. But he took it to a whole nother level by writing a YouTube song that was called "United Breaks Guitars." And it gained a couple million views. And so this was actually brought up at a marketing conference where they said, what do you do in this situation if you are United? Or moreover, if you're another company that has an opportunity to take advantage of this. So United said nothing. And that seems kind of stupid because, if you're getting all this attention, now it's an issue, so you don't really have to respond to it too much. But now that there's a YouTube video about it, you probably need to be thinking about it. I don't think that's the most ethical thing to do. I think you should have just addressed it in the first place. However, that's not necessarily what happened here. So anyway, when we get into United Breaks Guitars, they wrote that video, and I think it was a Gibson. Gibson are really good guitars. And, the easy thing to do from a newsjacking perspective is if I were Gibson, for instance, I could take advantage of this crisis and buy the dude a damn guitar. And they took it one step further because I believe they did buy him guitar. But the other thing they did was they gave out a printable sheet that comes from Gibson themselves, and also a phone version that has the law of the it was like United States airline policy. I don't know what the organization is called, but it says if you are a musician, you can bring your instrument on the plane with you. There is a law about that. And for good reason. There's a lot of people that are attached to it. I have a friend that is a expert plays the violin. I don't know how to say violinist, if that's the way to say it. But he's like, I have a violin that costs as much as people's houses. It's extremely expensive, and there's I do this. He's like, I do this professionally, so it makes sense that I would pay a lot of money for this. And so, if somebody were to tell me you can't take that on the plane, he's like, no, that's not happening. I'm taking it on the plane. So, but this is all kind of issue consideration, and it's all issue management of when do we need to respond? Do we need to respond? Because issues happen every day. It might not be worth responding to. You might have something. Recently, I'll give you another example. Recently, no, it's not Jimmy Judge. Jersey Mike's had a post. It wasn't from them, but there was a image that came up on Twitter about Black Lives Matter, and they were basically promoting a sandwich that paralleled with the Black Lives Matter movement, which seems really dumb in terms of making sure you do like newsjacking for this. Why would you do that? Why would you say that in the middle of a very important movement such as Black Lives Matter? It makes no sense to do newsjacking at that point. And so this is the kind of thing where as it kind of unfolded a little bit, and it didn't take long, and this shows the media literacy of people, where people were saying Black Lives Matter movement is extremely important. It's important that a lot of people are on board and promoting it. Where it was dumb was, why would Jersey Mike's promote something like this? And it turns out they didn't. And I think it was just some comedian that was trying to promote this online. Turned out to be a big hoax. And Jersey Mike's, I'd have to check their Twitter again. I don't think they responded, because when they looked through the image, there was nothing on any of their social media platforms or websites that would say that they were doing a very insensitive way to addressing Black Lives Matter. And so this is the kind of thing where, we can talk about hoaxes, and hoaxes are very interesting as well. We'll get into those later, but it was the kind of thing where I don't know that Jimmy John, I keep wanting to say Jimmy John's. I don't know that Jersey Mike's ever had anything to where they had like any recovery period, because it lasted so little. But they, from again, the time that it was going on, they didn't respond, and that it turned out to be a pretty good idea, is to not respond for something that they just didn't do. Now, it could be addressed of what happened if they would respond in such a way that they were like, hey, we recognize that Black Lives Matter is extremely important, and we support that, although we would never write a tweet that was so insensitive towards the movement. And so, they could have done that. I don't think they did, but again, it's just an interesting, really recent example. I think it happened last week that happened. So when we get into issues, when we get into crisis, we got to think about how can we be proactive. So we're taking a big turn here. How can we be proactive? First thing we can do is maintain good media relations. So mass media organizations, and I don't like using the term the media because there's no such thing as the media. They're all organizations that have their own way of framing stories, etc. And we want to make sure that we have good media relations for a PR person. A PR person will rely on journalists quite frequently, because they want to make sure that when their story is framed, they're doing so in the light that the organization wants them to. So I know from working at a local paper, one of the things that we talked about frequently when I was approached by organizations is they would say, we'd sit down for lunch and, constantly talk about things. And in a way, I kind of knew what was going on. They were trying to make sure that me as a journalist at the time was going to say the right thing or promote their organization in a positive light or to read their damn press releases. um, but in many ways, I would sit there and say, I understand and appreciate lunch. However, I'm going to post it as it comes across. But I am going to do it in fairness into your organization. Basically, not giving any unnecessary praise, but also doing it that it's fair. Um, my big philosophy as a journalist in this capacity was making sure that whoever my public relations contact was for the organization would get a fair report, and that was always my number one um, idea and concern for when we talked to PR representatives, was just to make sure that if there was something going on, I would contact them and say, I didn't deal with a lot of crises per se. I dealt with a lot of issues, and I said, hey, XYZ person, what's going on here? Can you tell it from your angle so I can write it appropriately, that gets the message across. So that's pretty important. The other thing is to maintain good community relations. Obviously, you are a citizen within your community. Corporate social responsibility talks about this a lot. Although there's a lot of debate whether organizations should be citizens within their community. Um, how much are you doing for your community? How much are you implementing good CSR things? Organizations like Hershey are like embedded into the business model of Hershey, Pennsylvania. It is so enriched with everything that they do, that makes it really important. Good employee relations and good consumer relations. You want to make sure you're taking care of your employees, and you want to make sure you're understanding your consumers' ideas and thoughts. So those are very important. So with this, 5 stages of crisis. This is going to be kind of an important thing to talk about here. First stage that we're dealing with is detect. And I'm going to be talking a lot about this term a lot throughout, is what are called prodromes. 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 And that is a detection of a disease, or in this case, a crisis. Think about those who have had a great illness. We talk about these things of what are some symptoms of this particular thing that or disease in this case, or in this case a crisis, that we need to manage it, and we need to make sure that we're ready to go. This is risk assessment, everybody. This is really important, that when we're talking about risk, we're making sure we're identifying problems as they come along. I mean, this is why people have comment boxes at their organizations to say, hey, what's going on? Is everything okay? Do you have any complaints, comments, concerns, so forth? So we don't have to address these issues as they escalate. We can solve them very quickly before they turn into something much, much worse. And so we talked about Virginia Tech last class and crisis mitigation for an on-campus shooter. But what about disgruntled employees? Internally, your employees might not tell you anything is wrong. How do you detect that? And this can be difficult, and it may require some anonymity of employees speaking up, but not actually saying thing out loud at a business meeting, because in many cases they're not going to say anything if they're uncomfortable. So my wife and I were watching this last week. Was the United States gymnastic program, where they kept everything within United States gymnastic, and that was a major, major flaw. And thus, everybody that was involved in these sexual harassment and assault scandals were very much punished at the largest extent of the law, as they should have been, because this was something that was not approached immediately. I mean, it should have never been done because it's horrific. However, what occurred in this particular instance was the fact that they weren't talking, the fact that it wasn't detected, the fact that it wasn't addressed made it so much worse in this capacity. So these are all things we need to be thinking about when we're dealing with a crisis, because a lot of times you don't know some of these things that are occurring. So detection is very difficult here. The next step is prevention and preparation. So this is fostering new methods and continuing them. Granted, they've kind of fallen by the wayside of doing this, but when Morgan Spurlock, for instance, did Supersize Me, which is that movie about McDonald's and the fast food industry clogging our arteries, and doing so in a capacity where we would sit here and talk about the allure of fast food, the fact that it's so cheap, how everything has become so large in scale and size, in his quasi experiment, although I question his methods as somebody that does social science. However, it made a big impact, and because of that, McDonald's responded in a number of ways, whether they ignored some things that Morgan said or Mr. Spurlock said, whether they addressed them head on, like completely getting rid of supersize options. Now, granted, you could still do it. I mean, it's just not called supersize anymore. But there's also, there are healthier options that are still adapted to this day. Now, granted, they're few and far between in retrospect of everything else that's there. But they did, make an effort at the time. Things like cutting down on hazardous conditions will go down in prevention and preparations. This is all very much OSHA guidelines for risk assessment. That was one thing that we had to consider. I worked at a ski tuning place, and we were burning plastic to put on skis. It's called PTEX. And we had no face coverings whatsoever, and OSHA's sitting there like, you're burning plastic and you're inhaling those fumes. Probably would be a good idea to have some face coverage, so you're not basically ingesting it through your olfactory senses here. Reward employees that have seller safety records. For what do you call it? Stakeholders, Blue Cross Blue Shield has done some efforts that if you stay active, if you're eating healthy, and you record all this information and talk about your progression of becoming more healthy, I know at least in North Dakota, they rewarded you. They offered like Amazon gift cards, which I was like, that gives me a bigger incentive to run. I'm going to tell you that. So that's the kind of thing that comes in with prevention preparation. Allowing free flow of information, even with negative news. What about that disgruntled employee? Computer-mediated communication works wonders for bad news, and so do focus groups. So that anonymity, or being able to be someone that isn't seen that much if they're having a problem, you got to make sure communication patterns are open during a crisis, internally and externally. Following up on past crisis, this is a big thing within media framing, for instance. There's something called priming, where we reference different cases consistently. We notice that when we've done research on school shootings or on shootings and mass shootings in general, is how many times that different shootings were referenced in the news. And again, for someone who has researched Virginia Tech and Aurora, Colorado, those shootings, they do keep coming up in many cases because of the magnitude and again, the horrific nature of these shootings that occurred here. So, following up on these past crises to make sure that you're doing everything you can, because of what happened at Virginia Tech, there's a lot more done through university policies in terms of how we respond to that kind of thing, which is kind of a sad thing that we have to do that. Actually, it's a really sad thing that we have to do it, but it is important that we make those choices to bring in this case, to make sure it doesn't happen again, or if we do, we're as prepared as humanly possible. Attend community meetings, talk with opinion public leaders, circulating newsletters to consumers. That's always a good thing to be able to do. Offer incentive programs like scholarships for kids, so forth. Hosting events, sponsoring community activities. Yeah, these are all variables of bringing in good relations with your employees, with your stakeholders, with your public. And we should all be able to do that. Now, again, this is on the risk stages, detecting and prevention before they even happen. However, what if they do happen? What happens if something occurs where you're not expecting it and the crisis does happen? Well, there's a couple things we can do with that too. First and foremost is containment. We need to cut the bad pieces off. Um, I'm going to show a video, and I hope I can get this interview with this person who I really enjoyed talking to, and I think they handled the crisis really well. Which is the CEO basically saying, "Look, this problem that occurred, I kind of consider what happened an issue." In their particular instance, we'll talk more about that. Like I said, I hope he'll agree to interview with me. Um, he kind of said, "Look, we understand what the problem was. We understand that people aren't really upset." But the CEO was like, "I'm really upset. This is not a big company either. This is a pretty small company. They do a really good job." And the owner was like, "I feel really responsible. I feel horrible about what happened." And people were like, "Damn, you know, we weren't too worried about it, but this seems like something that really, really bothered this person." And so I feel even more obligated to feel um, like we want to be here for that person, because again, it's not such a big company that when they travel, I see these people all the time. So it's not like their CEO and CFO, marketing director, are that hard to find or talk to. They're extremely approachable. So it is that kind of thing where we're cutting the bad pieces off, and in this case, doing so to where he was taking all the blame and putting it on himself, shifting away of his employees to say, "Look," and he even gave out his personal email to say, "Look, if you've got problems, email me directly. I want to talk about this, and make sure you're heard," which is, I thought, was a really good way to do it. Containment, that goes along with it, and that refers a lot to what we talked about with this example. However, Chipotle did it too, when they had their E. coli breakout with some of their food. One of the things they said was, "Look, look, look, this is just happening in the Pacific Northwest." I think it was in Oregon. "And we're shutting down those stores, even though they did like a whole day where they were talking about making sure their food was prepared properly." But they did say, "Look, these stores are being investigated." Domino's did the same thing when, this was in North Carolina, when an employee posted a video of someone putting cheese up their nose and putting it on pizza, which is disgusting. But it was something that, it was an elaborate hoax. They didn't actually do it. They were just trying to be obnoxious, really. This is trolling at its, unfortunately, at its worst. Um, but it was something where they kind of said, "Hey, look, we understand that this is a hoax. We understand that this isn't our problem, but at the same thing, it is our problem, and we're shutting down that store, and making sure that we do safety protocols with everything there." This way, not everything is effective, and some pieces might grow back. So this is kind of decentralized, in this capacity, where there's a really good book called Spider and the Starfish that talk about that. I'll get more into that. That's kind of going off topic. Last two things. The fourth one is recovery. There's tons of information on this, and we're actually going to go talk a lot about this throughout the semester. I mean, there's several ways to do it. Some things are unforgivable. Your public, regardless of what happened, will never forgive you for what you did or said. Um, and that is something that, if you are caught in a situation like that, um, it's like only time can heal, and sometimes you have to close up shop because what happened was so horrific that it can't be repaired. But a lot of things can. So that is something that we need to be mentioning, is that there's a lot of things in this world that we understand that mistakes happen. We understand that things go wrong, and we may not forgive you right now, but over time, if there's a conscious effort of making sure things are done correctly, that we can. So there are ways to do it. McDonald's with Morgan Spurlock, McDonald's came out much better, because of that. They lost a lot of stock that day, but they thrived afterwards, because of their practices on how they did things. And then, Exxon, I think, as horrific as the oil spill was, they handled it as well as they possibly could have, and then afterwards tried to make repairs as much as they possibly could have. Now, granted, is their procedures ethical? Probably not, but it is something that has to be talked about in terms of how you recover. Because again, you might be in a situation where you're part of an organization where they genuinely and maybe unintentionally screw up. And you have to think about these methods of what do I do to make sure that it is repaired in a safe and genuine way. I gotta stress genuine in this case, because if you're not being sincere about the things that you're trying to do to improve based on past mistakes, then it's going to be noticed, and it can't be forgiven. However, if you're making a genuine effort to promote good faith of not only apologizing but repenting, that's the big thing, is repenting to make sure that it doesn't happen again and making new policies. That's when things start can look back up for an organization. And then the last thing, it's learning. And as I said, it's not just about the apology, it's about repentance. Making sure as you are going through everything that you're doing so in a fashion that is not going to happen again. And so these were those 5 stations. Remember: detection, prevention, containment, recovery, and learning. So if we can remember those 5 things, it's just kind of a start within a crisis. That's going to help us in it's going to benefit us in major ways in the long run. So, okay, I ran for over 30 minutes. Sorry about that, everybody. Be sure to check everything for As You Learn, including finishing your dream job due tonight, 11:59. But also getting started on talking about crises. So look at that. I actually wouldn't encourage you to start right away. Take a little time before you actually do that assignment, because it would be due by Monday. So I'd recommend like sometime later this week get started on it. Because the more and more we talk about crisis, you might have an opinions of changing on things. So that is it for today. Hope you all have a wonderful Monday. Enjoy this nice weather if you're up in Boone, because it's beautiful. So stay safe. Hope you all are doing well. Email me if you have any questions in the meantime, and I will see you tomorrow.